Hello, welcome, and thank you all for joining us for our event on new advances in technology related to marine ecosystems in the Arctic. On behalf of the marine ecosystems, the Arctic Observing and the Polar Technology team leads, welcome. Thanks for taking the time. So we're excited to introduce three speakers today who will talk to you about some recent advances in polar technology and marine systems. And we hope you'll have the chance to learn something new about what's been happening recently and think about how your research may align with it and think about some potential new applications for some of these exciting developments. And we hope you'll all join us for an engaging conversation after the three presentations to share your ideas about where the technology might go from here. So with that, I will turn it over to our first speaker, Dr. Mike Steele. He's a senior physical oceanographer with the Applied Physics Lab at the University of Washington. And Mike, if you'd like to share your screen and pull your slides up, we'll hear your presentation on work related to Saildrones in the Alaskan Arctic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see. Cool. All right. All right, so I am talking today about saildrones in the Alaskan Arctic. And here's one coming into view right now. This was being tested earlier this year near Dutch Harbor. And there's one in the back, way back there, little red spot back there as well. So I'll tell you about saildrones and what we've been doing with them. So my connection with saildrones is via this project called MIST-3, Multi-Sensor Improved Sea Surface Temperature, Phase 3, continuing the GRIST partnership and improving Arctic data. GRIST, that's how you pronounce it, is an acronym, stands for Group for High Resolution Sea Surface Temperature. So it's this really cool international group of scientists who are devoted to providing the world with really good SST, sea surface temperature data, both gridded and ungridded. A lot of satellite analysis in this group, but also in situ observations. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And so this phase 3 was real focused on the Arctic, and that's why I'm involved. So MIST-3 was funded by NOAA, the National Ocean Partnership Program, which is this umbrella funding agency. And in this particular case, the money came from NASA. Next year is our final year. The lead PI was Shel Gentleman. I say was because she's now at NASA headquarters. She's very much involved with saildrone and sea surface temperature satellite data. So our lead PI is Marisol Garcia Reyes, also from Farallon Institute. She's a coastal oceanographer, upwelling, air-sea interaction. I'm involved because I know about the Arctic, and also I have been very much interested in upper ocean and sea surface temperature changes up there. And then last but not least, Peter Manette from University of Miami is a real scholar on SST and skin SST, you know, the difference between what the satellite sees and what we might call a mixed layer temperature. He also knows a lot about atmospheric corrections for satellite retrievals. And we have a bunch of other people involved. These NOP projects encourage collaboration between industry, academia, and government. So there's a bunch of people at various levels of, COI or partner, whatever. All right, so what is a saildrone? It's here. Here's our schematic of a saildrone. It's a autonomous sailboat. It doesn't have a canvas sail. It's got a rigid wing that acts like the sail on a sailboat, like an airplane wing. Then it's got a cross boom and a tail that acts like an airplane tail to keep the sail pointing into the wind. It's a pretty big thing. It's 7 meters long, and it's 7 meters tall from top to bottom, 5 meters above the surface. Its speed, of course, varies with the wind. Maybe we can say a typical speed is about 4 knots. And so, the wind makes it go, but it does have solar panels and batteries to power the sensors, the scientific sensors, communications, and navigation. The company is based near San Francisco, across the bay from San Francisco, and they've got an interesting business model. They don't want to sell you a Saildrone; they'll lease it to you. You basically rent it for however long you want it for, and then they have their own mission control. And so, piloting the Saildrone is a collaborative process between the scientists and the Saildrone people. You say to them, "Tomorrow we want the Saildrone to go over here." And they say, okay, or they say, no, because the winds aren't looking good over there, or it's too close to the coast, or some other thing. And so it's a kind of a collaborative process. There's a bunch of sensors on every Saildrone, and of course, it's very configurable. We've even had different configurations over the last 3 years of our project. This is what it looks like this year. So in red are the atmospheric measurements, in green are the sort of ocean surface measurements, and in blue are the subsurface ocean measurements. So typical would be ADCP, ocean, acoustic Doppler current profilers, fluorometer for chlorophyll, CTD with an oxygen sensor for temperature, salinity, and oxygen. And this project is funded by GRIST or by SST people. And so we've got 7 additional custom temperature sensors deployed along the keel that you can see down there on number 15. And sampling is pretty frequent. So our first project funded by this, this project was in 2019, and we had 2 Saildrones. And we collaborated very strongly with NOAA PMEL, who had 3 Saildrones. They actually had 4, but one of them hung around in the Bering Sea. So 5 went together in the summer of 2019, and they tried to kind of poke around near the ice edge. They were chasing sea ice, not chasing glacier ice like that movie, but chasing sea ice. And we had some success, question mark. The real idea was to try to get near the ice and measure the interesting oceanography near the ice, but maybe not get into the ice, but unfortunately, sometimes, yes, got into the ice. And my favorite paper from this so far was sort of not really a science paper, but a logistics paper by Andy Chiotti from PMEL. Which I will show you more about next. So the question there is, can real-time Saildrone data, sea surface salinity, SSS, and sea surface temperature, SST, be used to avoid the ice edge? To get near there, but not to get into it. And so here's an example of a time series where where one of the Saildrones was getting near the ice. So on the left, we're 350 meters away from the ice edge at timestamp 33 minutes. And I don't see very much ice there on the left. And then 5 minutes later, oh yeah, there's definitely ice out there. And in terms of sea surface salinity, it's really not doing much. It's staying more or less constant. And while the temperature is cooling a little bit, and then, oh boy, 5 minutes after that, we're in the ice. The salinity changed as a step function, just plummeted down to a low fresh value. And the temperature, as I said, was sort of this gradual cooling. And so, the conclusion from this paper is no, can't use, or it's not straightforward how to figure out how to use salinity and temperature. There were other times where there was a step function in temperature. There were other times where it was gradually freshening near the ice edge. There were other times where you get time series like this and we were nowhere near the ice, just some fresh temperature front or a salinity front. So it was very difficult to figure out how to do this. And so the next step is Andy and others at PMEL are thinking about some artificial intelligence analysis that would take the imagery and the data and try to do a better job of this, of trying to avoid the ice edge. We got a bunch of other publications that came out of this 2019 expedition. And a couple of them were led by Jorge Vázquez Cuervo at JPL, comparing saildrone salinity and saildrone temperature with satellite salinity and satellite temperature. Lots of interesting conclusions there, which I could talk about if we have time later. Qidong Zhang from PMEL has a nice paper that looked at using saildrone observations in atmospheric forecasting and found really interesting differences between the value of temperature kind of variables versus sea level pressure variables. And there's more papers in press or in preparation and in press. The data from this expedition are available at JPL, the PODAC. That's a data center. So you go to this website and you search for Saildrone Arctic, you'll find it. There was no expedition in 2020 because of COVID. 2021, we managed to get 2 more Saildrones up there. PMEL didn't run Saildrones that year. And we went up to the northern Chukchi Sea and we ran parallel tracks for around 2 weeks each with increasing separation distance to look at correlation length scales. The data from this expedition are soon to be made available at PODAC. Not there yet, but soon. So what's happening this year, 2022? We thought we'd have a real strong collaboration with the DBO, the Distributed Biological Observatory. So this is a international project that has found some biological hotspots in the Alaskan Arctic and encourages any ship that's up there to do these sort of sections with whatever parameters you can measure. And so we have 2 Saildrones up there right now. They left from Dutch Harbor as usual. And we had one of them going along DBO3, I call it east because we're not going to get into the Russian waters. And then the northern one went up to DBO4. I guess there's an old and a new version. We hung out at the old one. And then when the ice retreated, we went up to DBO5 near Point Barrow. So some highlights from this year. This is a picture taken from the Norseman 2 on July 31st, just a couple of weeks ago. One of our Saildrones going along DBO3, heeling over. You can see it kind of heeled over there, which is nice. So both Saildrones, we have a strong collaboration with Bob Picard and Frank Barr from Woods Hole, who really love looking at ADCP data, and these guys have ADCP data as well. And so they're really digging into the ADCP data from these Saildrones. One reason is to try to sample the Alaskan coastal current. So DBO3 is a line that stays 3 nautical miles off the coast. And Bob Picard said, well, can you get closer than that? Because he suspected there were strong currents there as a signature of the Alaskan coastal current. So we tried, and the poor little guy got swept northward. So Saildrone is very good at piloting these things. And so they went again and waited for some strong winds that could help fight the current. And we successfully sampled that very close in part of DBO3 now. DBO4 and 5 are in the north, and we've had some ice challenges. There's been a late ice retreat this year, as probably many of you know. And I want to show you a picture from yesterday. So here's a picture from yesterday. And unfortunately, our northern Saildrone got caught in the ice yesterday. And here is a picture of the DBO5. The Saildrone was moving along to the northwest, and about halfway up there, it started seeing some ice. And so this is a screen capture from yesterday. We were starting to pilot it, the Saildrone, away from the section, and today it's out of the ice again. It's more it's farther away towards the southwest. And in fact, today is the last day of the expedition. So both Saildrones are now heading home. In other words, heading south to Dutch Harbor. I wondered if Andy's analysis, like he found for 2019, would hold for this latest ice encounter. So I grabbed some of the time series from yesterday. So this is a day's worth of data. Temperature on the top, salinity on the bottom. And wow, actually, it looks like we had a little bit of warning there, at least a couple of hours maybe, where both temperature and salinity were dropping, getting colder and fresher as we headed near ice. So it looks like we did have some warning. And so, yeah, some more analysis will be interesting here, possibly in collaboration with PMEL people who are thinking about this kind of thing. So what does the future hold? Well, our MIST 3 project is over next year, and this year was our final Saildrone year. And as far as NOAA and PMEL, I think Cal will tell us more about that in a few minutes, and I'm sure that they have plans to go back up there. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mike. If anybody has an immediate question for Mike, we can entertain maybe one short question, and then I'll suggest that we move through our next two presentations and then save most of the dialogue for the Q&A portion afterwards. Does anyone have a burning question?
Yeah, Mike, I've got one burning question. How long can these Saildrones stay out for? I mean, you're going from Dutch Harbor up to DBO4 and back at 4 knots. That's quite a long time. What are the limitations in terms of time at sea?
Yeah, I probably should be able to answer that. I can't really answer that, but I'll tell you that in 2019 they sailed from San Francisco. They've gone across the Pacific Ocean, so they have they can go a long way. As long as the sun is up for the sensors and there's wind to power them. In previous years we had some concerns. So we're turning around now. It's mid-August. In 2019 and 2021, the time period was later in the summer, even into early fall, and the solar power became a problem. So
well, I can understand that. Is there a problem with ship traffic?
Well, we definitely coordinated with DBO people to make sure we didn't run into Norseman 2 or any other research vessels. There's an AIS on there and radar reflector, and I have no idea. Maybe I don't know if they've been run over or not, but we've had good luck so far.
Great, thanks. Just for those quick ones, thanks.
All right, I can introduce our next speaker. Dr. Léa Bouffant is a postdoctoral associate at the K. Lisa Yang Center for Conservation Bioacoustics at Cornell. She's a marine bioacoustic researcher investigating new technologies to monitor biodiversity, and specifically how to use passive acoustic recordings in conservation-oriented marine research. And when we were doing the planning for this meeting, I just happened across an article about one of her recent projects and just sent her a cold call email, and she agreed to give a talk. So I am so grateful. Thank you. Her talk today is titled Eavesdropping at the Speed of Light, Distributed Acoustic Sensing of Baleen Whales in the Arctic.
Thank you, Lisa. And that wasn't a cold email. I was very happy, and I'm very honored to be able to speak today. So thank you all. I will dive right in because you gave me a great introduction. So I just want to start by mentioning that I'm presenting on behalf of my co-authors, and most of this work was done while I was a postdoctoral student at NTNU in Norway, and that most of this work was funded by ARC-X. So yeah, let me take you to a world where sounds are omnipresent, and this is the depth of our oceans. And in this vast environment, large baleen whales, they have been reigning over the low frequency and producing sound that are flirting with the limit of our human hearing range. And so with the industrialization of our world, those pristine environments have changed, and the soundscapes are now filled with human-made noise and anthropogenic sounds. So eavesdropping on the ocean has become one of the most essential methods to monitor marine mammals, and they present several advantages. They can be autonomous, continuous, long-term, and large-scale. But it's still relatively expensive to deploy conservation-focused hydrophones. And so despite the numerous efforts of the community, we can still say that we're lacking some data and that the oceans are undersampled. And so what if I was telling you that there is a possibility to convert portion of the telecommunication fiber optic cables that are already deployed in our oceans, and we could convert those into hydrophone listening arrays? Well, the first time I heard that, my reaction was like, what and how? So this is what I'm going to get into now. So the method is called distributed acoustic sensing, or DAS. And the way it works is that we're plugging in a device, a piece of equipment. We're plugging it in a dark fiber optic cable, which it's dark because it means that there is no data that is going through that one specific fiber optic cable in a bundle. And so we're connecting the interrogator. And what it does is that it is sending laser pulses in the fiber, and a portion of the light that is emitted is reflected backscattered towards the interrogator. This is because of very small impurity, very small defects that are inherent to the fiber optic cable. And so now when there is a sound wave that is applying pressure on the fiber optic cable, those defects might move a little bit. This creates time differences, travel time differences in the light pulses that are sent, and we're converting those differences into strain data. And strain is analogous to acoustic pressure. Now, when we have this in context, so usually the fiber optic cables are lying at the bottom of the ocean. Often they can be a little trenched closer to shore to avoid being dragged or moving around with tides. And using the technology of distributed acoustic sensing, what we're doing is that we're actually creating virtual hydrophones all along a fiber optic cable. And so those virtual hydrophones, this is why we're calling it distributed acoustic sensing. And so this technology have shown to be able to record geophysical sources, and very recently to be able to pick on waterborne signals such as ship and air gun. And the work we've conducted is showing that we can also look at whales. So let me take you to the field site. This study was conducted in the Svalbard archipelago. So as you all know, with the global warming and the ice coverage that is shrinking down, boreal species have been seen to have a poleward shift. In this area, we talk about an Atlantification of that region that is just at the doorstep of the Arctic. And so what it means is that when we look at sighting numbers of large baleen whale species, such as blue whale, minke, and fin whales, they have been seen norther and norther every year. Simultaneously with the animals that are having habitat change, our human use of those areas are changing as well. One of the project that I find kind of iconic of that is the potential cross-Arctic shipping lane that would actually go just next to the archipelago. And so we need to be able to monitor, to have an idea of the distribution of the different species that are in those areas, to be able to, well, have a baseline, but also be able to monitor the change. So let me take you to Eastfjord, which is one of the biggest fjord on Spitsbergen. And the blue line that you're seeing here, so we have Eastfjord on the right side of the map, the open ocean on the left side of the map. And the blue line that you're seeing is the fiber optic cable that we used that was connected Longyearbyen to Ny-Ålesund, a bit more north of the archipelago. You can see also some marks. So these represent a mark every 10 kilometers along that fiber optic cable. We placed the interrogator on land in Longyearbyen. And so it was it was recording data for about 42 days during the summer 2020. I always forget to mention that, but the data was sent in real time to where we were sitting at NTNU in mainland Norway, where we could actually process that data. So the data was sampled at a little bit above 600 hertz, which means that we at that time thought that we would have the potential to cover the frequency range of low frequency baleen whales. And we had a spatial resolution of 4 meters, which means that we had a virtual hydrophone every 4 meters all along the way of this fiber optic cable, which spanned of up to 120 kilometers. So now looking at that data, we're able to record various sounds from whales. So you might not all be familiar with this type of representation. These are spectrograms. So we're representing the frequency as a function of time, frequency or pitch. And so those images come from virtual hydrophones at different locations along the fiber optic cable, and you can see those locations highlighted in pink on the left side. The amplitude of the signal is relative to the color that we're seeing on the spectrogram, and the amplitude here is in dB relative to strain. And so the first spectrogram, so on the top, we're seeing this long tonal signal that are like about 10, 15 seconds long. They're very characteristic of North Atlantic blue whale. And we know that because of their frequency, their duration, their repetition. The second signal, for this one, we're actually not completely sure. It could be either humpback whales or some signals very similar to that have been also attributed to male North Atlantic blue whales. The last panel, and oh, sorry, I have the sound for the second one. And I will move to the last one, which is a bunch of what we call down sweeps. So these are like chirps that are going down, and you can hear it now. And so these are probably produced by fin whales. So we scanned through the entire data set and quantified those different types of signals and reported them as a function of where they were spotted along the fiber optic cable. And just from that, I think this is already quite interesting. We can see a difference of views between blue whales that are making those very stereotyped signal and those downsweep that can be produced either by fin whales, by some blue whales, but not only males, they can be produced by male, females, and calves, or it could also be produced by sei whales. And so you can see that blue whales we recorded the calls of blue whales mostly outside of the fjord, where a bunch of those downsweep were mostly inside the fjord. So we can already see a bit of difference of use. But so we just looked at the data as if we were looking at normal hydrophone data, picking up one or a few locations and just looking at the signal. But how can we take advantage of this distributed sensing? Is it a question of representation? This image, so the lower panel, is representing a recording that lasted for 100 seconds, and that was recorded all along the fiber optic cable in the highlighted zone, so between about 68 kilometer and 83.4, something like that. And so we are calling those representations spatiotemporal because we're looking at the signal over the distance and over time. And so what you can see are those hyperbolas. And what do they correspond to? If we look at a channel that is very close to the apex, which is the location where we receive the signal first, this is what we're recording. And so I have those little bars to help you match the signals. But so we can see that actually we're recording a signal from a North Atlantic blue whale, and we're recording it over multiple channels, which is why we're having those hyperbolas. They correspond to the speed of sound in the water column. It takes longer to go further away. And this is highlighted by those little, the last line where you can see 1,500 meters per second, which is the speed of sound underwater. The color is, again, the strain. And yeah, so we can now move to a slightly more complicated example, which I think is even more fascinating. So again, we're representing the signal in the spatiotemporal representation where we have the distance as a function of time. This time we're looking at 130-second window of observation. And so we have those hyperbolas, but at 3 different locations along the fiber optic cable. And again, if we look at one virtual channel in one of those areas close to the apex, this is what we're seeing. The first spectrogram was, again, a North Atlantic blue whale, very stereotyped signal. And inside the fjord, we're seeing those downsweep that can be either social call from a blue whale, fin whale, or a sei whale. We can also look into different types of representation. So here, it's exactly the same example as before, but instead of having distance as a function of time, we're looking at distance as a function of frequency. And this is a long snapshot for the entire 130 seconds that we had before. And you can see that we see those downsweep have a wider frequency band than the rest of the signal that are received. You can also spot that they're at different location here along the fiber optic cable. And on the right side, this is how we constructed the left side picture. So every 2 seconds, we're doing a Fourier transform, so a spectral representation of the signal. And so if there are some geophysicists in the crowd, I'm not sure, but you can see some interference patterns that are probably due to surface reflection of the signal, which I know they're quite familiar with airgun sources. We also looked at the localization of the whales. I won't go into details into the method, but basically what we did is that we compared theoretical and measured time difference of arrivals. And so we crafted the method and had to try on a signal from a ship and compare the result of our localization with the AES of the ship, so the positioning of the ship, and they matched pretty well. So we applied that to a whale that was potentially passing by the fiber optic cable. And so here is what we obtained. There will be more panels, but like the top one is, again, distance against time representation of the signal. And under it, you have some spectrogram and waveforms, which are beamformed. I will explain a little more about that just after. But now, if we look at the entire passage of the whale, we can see the white line is indicating how it is, how there is a move out, how we can see the whale moving along the fiber optic cable. The beamforming is basically summing up coherently virtual channels that are receiving the signal to improve the quality and improve the signal to noise ratio. And we can play the one that has the little note. You probably won't hear the first very low tonal part, but you will hear some of the downsweep just after. There you go. Yeah, so we have a slightly better quality of the signal, plus we know where the whale is. One final example of what we have been able to do with this, to me, is quite fascinating. That was inspired by the paper that is on the top right corner, where they actually used a song from fin whales to be able to image the first layer, well, actually more than the first layer of the ground, so to do seismic crustal imaging. And so the device they use for that is ocean bottom seismometer. They tracked the whale. The whale was vocalizing very regularly and was doing pulses that are very similar to airgun signals. And so using all of that, they were able to look at what was into the ground. We thought we could do the same, but instead of using multiple whale calls, we could use our our distributed network of receivers and one whale call. And so we did that at 2 locations. So one that is outside, which is the figure that is on the left, and one which is inside the fjord. And with a bit of interpretation, so the red line is showing the signal that propagates through the waters and their multiples, and the orange lines are potentially signals that are going through the first layer of the ground. And so what we can observe is that the orange, so the orange, so the signal that went within the first layer comes earlier on the left side than on the right side, which potentially means that the layer is thinner outside of the fjord than inside, and which actually corresponds to geophysical surveys of the area. So all of those results are presented at length in the paper that we recently published, and all of the data that we used in the paper is freely available and open. So in a way, repurposing an existing infrastructure, distributed acoustic sensing enables the monitoring of whales in their environment in real time and at new spatial scales and resolutions. So I would go for some perks and advantages is that we can have acoustic recordings with a minimum infrastructural and operational cost. We can have an improved spatial coverage, and there is a potential for real-time monitoring in crucial areas. We know of some limitations already, is that distributed acoustic sensing is currently limited to the first repeater that are placed by telecommunication companies along fiber optic cable to they do that to improve the transmission of data. Usually this first repeater is between 50 and 70 kilometers offshore. And also, well, fiber optic cables usually belong to private companies, so there could be issues with the availability of them. And in terms of follow-up study, we want to, well, assess the quality of that recorded data, compare it better with normal hydrophone, and develop big data approaches to process the data. And I wanted to open with a few questions and food for thoughts. So where do you think this technology could be applied? What project could benefit from this method? What are the requirements to use this method in your framework? And what are the potential limitations that you foresee? Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a fascinating presentation, and I'm glad you've posed these questions, and I'm hoping that our audiences, the gears in their minds will be turning so that we'll have a fruitful discussion to help answer these questions at the end. Does anybody have a burning question right now that they'd like to pose? Okay, if not, then I'll move on to our next speaker, and hopefully we can return to some exciting conversation about this during the Q&A period. So really exciting potential applications of this. Thank you. So our next speaker is Calvin Mordy from the University of Washington and NOAA Pacific Marine Environmental Lab. Cal is also a co-lead of the Innovative Technology for Arctic Exploration program, and he's going to talk us through a range of exciting new forms of technology that have been developed through this program in recent years. So Cal, I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
All right, let's go to the next slide. So about 8 years ago, PMEL began this program called the Innovative Technology for Arctic Exploration, or ATA program. So I'm a PI in that program with Scott Stalin, an engineer, Heather Tabasola is a program coordinator. Chris Mining was a PI on this, but he recently left for PNNL, and Jessica Cross was a PI for the first few years before she moved into carbon dioxide removal. So let's go to the next slide. So the goal of ETA is to identify science gaps, working with science PIs and engineers to develop new innovations to address these gaps. So each innovation has an ETA lead, an engineering lead, and a science lead. We form partnerships with federal, state, academia, and industry. And then let's go to the next. We have an army of engineers then that work with the PIs to design and develop and build these prototypes. And then let's go to the next one. And it's we then go out in the field. We demonstrate, figure out what worked, what didn't, and try to increase the readiness levels of each one of these. Finally, transition these into operations. And the transition is important because we don't want to build things that will end up on the shelf. We want to make sure that through this process, we ensure that each innovation has a landing spot and will be used in operations. So let's go to the next slide. The types of technologies we're working on are floats and moorings and vehicles and imaging and machine learning. And we do this through a number of public-private partnerships. And as I said, each innovation has a science lead, and each innovation has an army of engineers that work on this. So we have a large number of partners through the whole program. Next slide. So we work from the Aleutians to the Beaufort Sea, but these innovations are then applicable pole to pole. So now I just want to walk you through a number of innovations that we're working on. So let's go through the next slide. So about 40% of the U.S. catch of fish and shellfish comes from the Bering Sea. And to help manage this fishery every year, in the fall, the researchers assemble all the information they've collected during the field season, present this to managers through these reports, including like ecosystem status report. And for many years in the ecosystem status report, they report these science gaps they have, and one of the gaps was primary production. So there was no good metrics of primary production in the Bering Sea. So let's go to the next slide. One of the primary sources of data for these ecosystem status reports and to evaluate what's happening in the Bering are these long-term moorings in the Bering Sea. And the M2 mooring, Peggy, has been in the Southeast Bering Sea for about 27 years collecting data. And next we can see the, on the M2 mooring, next slide, shows that we on the primary mooring, we have sensors at discrete depths, and it kind of gives us a glimpse at what's going on through the season. So these are chlorophyll data from discrete depths at the M2 Peggy mooring. But this data was really insufficient to establish kind of a robust metric for primary production. So the ETA program, in the next slide, worked with instrumenting a crawler. This is a sensor that falls through the water column along a mooring line, collecting, profiling the water, and then it crawls back up to uses wave energy to crawl back up to the surface, and does this thousands of times through the season. So our next slide, we can see how we get a complete picture of the water column. In this case, this is 4 years of chlorophyll data. And you can see that the majority of primary production and export is kind of associated with the spring phytoplankton bloom. And then after the bloom, there's a 2-layer system that develops with a nutrient-depleted surface layer. And you can kind of see a subsurface chlorophyll max. And then in the fall bloom occasionally shows up. So next slide, as the team of biologists then take this data, not just the chlorophyll, but temperature, oxygen, and other data to estimate through multiple methods what levels of gross and net primary productivity is happening at the M2 mooring site. And we'll extend this through the other sites that are located in the Bering. And then these now are metrics that are now going into the ecosystem status reports. So that gives us an idea of what the prowler can do during the summer, but what happens when there's ice around? How can we work around, how can we get similar data for when there's ice in the region? So that takes us to our next innovation, which is the rise float. So how can we get sampling and profiling during the spring and fall transitions when there's few research in the region? So next slide. So here is the schematic showing what happens with the rise float. In autumn, in the summer or fall, we deploy the rise float, and it's profiling through the water column. And then in winter, a signal is sent that floods the float. It sinks, goes to the bottom. Ice has a unique sound signature. So we have a hydrophone that's on the mooring, and it listens for ice, and then the absence of ice, and then it inflates and comes back to the surface and begins crawling again. So we're going to, this was delayed a couple of years from COVID, so we couldn't get in the water. So this year is our first real deployment of the full, we've done a prototype, but this is our first real deployment. Will be in a few weeks up in the Arctic. So the other thing that we're interested in is of course what's happening under the ice, because the thought is that you have ice algae that accumulates, and then as ice melts, that biomass is exported rapidly to the benthos and supports the strong benthic community. So how do we sample up under the ice? So let's go to the next slide. And we do this through a thing called pop-up floats. And let's go to another one. So here's a schematic of a pop-up float. We deploy this in the summer or fall, and it has an anchor, and it sits on the bottom and collects hourly data on the bottom. And then at a prescribed time, it's released from the anchor, and we increase the sampling rate, so we get about a 4 hertz profile of the water column. Comes up underneath the ice, and then collects hourly data under the ice. And then once the ice melts, it transmits the data, but has a second thermistor, so we get SST as the float is floating along. We get temperature, pressure, PAR, fluorescence. We have a camera, and we all get tilt, and we're developing a very inexpensive salinity sensor to go on these as well. So let's go to the next slide and look at some data. So in 2019, we had a float that popped up in panel A. You can see that red circle. It popped up underneath a unique shaped flow, ice flow, and we can follow that flow as it tracked around in panel B, about for a couple of months. Panel C shows the ice draft in black, so you can see that it kind of started at about 1.8 meters thick under the water, and then it slowly melted during its drift. And then in panel D, you can see the under ice PAR light levels in orange and then chlorophyll in green. And so you can see the accumulation of chlorophyll even under these very low light levels. And then the disappearance of chlorophyll when the ice begins to melt with these, with large accumulations of ice algae that are in the benthos. And that was published by Stabenow et al. In DSR2. And then there's more, so you can see the camera images there. It's not, it's you're right up against the ice, so they're kind of out of focus because it's, you know, you've got it right up to your face. But you can see that even, you can see the accumulation of that green color and then the disappearance as that ice begins to thin. So let's go to the next slide. So these are small devices that we've deployed from ships of opportunity. And next slide shows what our next gen pop-up looks like. And we have an anchor weight that holds it to the bottom. And then there's a jack screw that ejects that weight. There's a profiling weight, which makes sure that we're ascending at about 10 centimeters a second is our goal. And then when we get to the surface, we eject that weight so that we have enough buoyancy to clear the surface of the ocean and make sure we have clear transmission of the data back home. So, and I just had a call the other day for a team that wants to do a pop-up cameras for looking at rockfish habitats. So these kind of, these innovations hopefully have extensions that go beyond just our initial PIs that are working with this. All right, so let's go to the next slide. And that is the Saildrone. So we've heard a little bit about this, so I'll skip along here. Let's go to the next slide. In 2009, Richard Jenkins set the land speed record for a wind-powered vehicle at 126 miles an hour. So there's actually a cockpit in this vehicle, and he's sitting in there. It looks like something out of Star Wars. So then next slide shows that he automated the innovation. He brought the platform to PMEL, and he said, how can we maybe use this for oceanography? So Atay took this on, and let's go to the next slide. Our initial missions were in 2015 to 2019. And you can see on the top slide there, there's outriggers on the Saildrone. So that's a very early version of this. And then as Mike showed, we were in the ice a few times, managed to get in and out of there. We had a rudder issue with one, but we were really successful. I was amazed that we didn't have more damage to any of the Saildrones. And then now the bottom picture is not from the Arctic, but it shows that it's a much sleeker design now for Saildrones. And now these have been transitioned into operations. So Atay is no longer involved with the Saildrone, but these are now used pole to pole in the Arctic, the tropics, the West Coast, and even circumnavigating the Antarctic. And last year we're in the wall of a hurricane. So a lot of neat applications for the Saildrone. So let's go to the next slide. So at Atay, we worked with Saildrone and a large group of researchers and engineers, and through a whole number of iterations, we were able to incorporate a large sensor suite into the platform. And a lot of effort went into the data formats and delivery and helping with the dashboard design for real-time communications. And Ned Copeland was instrumental in helping to get a lot of this instrumentation and sensor work and data delivery done. And now each one of these has a story, and you heard a little bit from what Mike said, but let's go to the next slide. And I'm gonna focus just on one story, which is the fish biomass. This was a Simrad eco sounder that was incorporated into the Saildrone from Alex Gerbertis and Noah Lawrence Slavas at PMEL and Ivar Vagan at Simrad. Let's go to the next slide. So Kerry Kuhn and Jeremy Sterling have been monitoring this multi-decadal decline of northern fur seals in the Pribilof Islands. And one of the questions is, did the seals acquire enough food during their 5 to 10 day foraging trips off the islands to come back and feed their young? Do they have enough food to feed their young, or the young seals have enough fat to survive when their parents leave them in the fall and they're on their own? So they use data from the field they put data in the field and they have energetic models, but they don't have, they're lacking some of the key elements in their energetic models for understanding how much energy the seals are acquiring and how much energy they need to feed their pups. So some of the field data includes these devices that are affixed to the animals to track their foraging trips and their diving behavior. So in this inset, you can see the tracks of 29 animals that were tagged in 2016. At the same time, the black and white tracks show the simultaneous Saildrone survey that was done for fish biomass. And in the red and magenta tracks are when a Saildrone actually followed the animals. So we have the simultaneous fish biomass and the diving behavior. So let's go to look at that in the next slide. So in the top panel shows the acoustic data from the Saildrone, and you can see at 20 meters, there was an abundance of small pollock. Now these are skinnier fish that don't have as much calories. And then at the bottom, you can see an increasing number of acoustic backscatter from large pollock. These are adults with high fat content. And then in the bottom panel, you can see the diving behavior of the seals. And they're mostly diving on these small pollock. But once there's an abundance of larger pollock, they do a little exploratory dive, and then they start diving on the larger fish. So that gives them an idea of how much time is spent with small versus large pollock as far as their foraging trips. But how do you know if they're actually catching a fish? So that's our next, let's go to the next slide. And that takes us to our imaging efforts at ETA. So next slide. We worked with an Australian company called CATS, and we developed a unique video camera that we put on the animal. So the map, if you ignore the video, which is hard to ignore, if you ignore the video, the map shows where the foraging trips of these animals are that had a camera. With the orange color indicates where we actually got video. So 60 hours of video were obtained. There's about 3,000 capture attempts. But that means you have to go through each one of these videos to figure out when was a capture attempt. It took 2 years for Molly McCormley and Berlin Berkmeyer to process all of the data. So now we have some idea about how efficiently are they foraging when they're diving, how many fish are they capturing. And now we can identify the differences in their foraging behavior related to the prey size. So the next steps are to have some AI that'll be accomplished by Joshua Osborne here at PMEL to make the processing of the video a little quicker. And then we want to improve the battery life of these so we can get additional video from the seals. So let's go to the next slide. I'll just wrap up here real quick. So we're also doing imagery, working with a team of biologists to do some classification. I hope we haven't started this yet to do classification for phytoplankton, including HABs. And then for zooplankton, we're working with Dave Kimmel and Deanna Krauser to get a zooplankton camera on the Dyson. It'll be going out here in the next few weeks. The imagery you see there for zooplankton is from Julie Keister and Rob Campbell. And we use that for kind of a training set until we can get out in the field with Sandeep Gilla at Texas A&M providing the algorithm, and Michael Stanley at Linker providing the classification for zooplankton. So there's a huge story that goes along this. It's a fascinating story. Dave Kimmel should tell that story. It's amazing. All right, so let's go to the next slide. I don't have time to talk about other things. We have profiling, different types of profiling floats. We've worked with the lab on a chip, and I hope to extend that further with some ammonium lab on a chip work. And we have an Oculus glider that's currently working off a GNOME. Let's go to the next slide, and I'll just say that a little bit on where we're hoping to go next. As this is a benthic system that's changing, we would like to get some measurements of benthic respiration. MBARI has a benthic rover that they've deployed in deep water, and we may have something similar to that. Maybe not a rover, I don't know yet, but some measurements of automated measurements of benthic respiration. And then working with the team at FSC, you can see this is kind of how it works. Here's a drawing on an envelope, back envelope that kind of shows up and says, hey, can you do this? And so we're looking for a bentopelagic fish camera so we can understand the northern migration of fish through the Bering and into the Chukchi as things are warming up. I think that's it. Let's go to another slide and call it quits. Yep. So these are science-driven innovations, kind of high risk, high reward, and meeting NOAA's needs for a blue economy and a climate-ready nation. So, wow, I think I went a little over.
Thank you so much, Cal. That's quite a lot to cover and some amazing work that your team has been doing. Does anyone have a question for Cal before we move into the broader Q&A portion?
I see a question on how much interference, biological interference, do we have from seals and seabirds on the Saildrone? And we do have an image of a seal years ago riding the Saildrone for a bit. So I can't speak to seabirds though.
Kevin, what do those pop-up floats cost? I mean, they're expendable, right? So
Yes, and the goal is to keep them at a few $1,000s. That's the goal. And of course, as we're going through our prototypes, it's a little more expensive, but we're doing what we can to drop the cost down. We started with a propane tank as our last design, but there was still too much effort in the tank itself is cheap, but there's a little, you can't automate a lot of the manufacturing. So it's a little, you still have a lot of human time to cut and weld and do all that stuff. So we're trying to keep it down to a few $1,000.
Well, as I unmute, I apologize that it's 12 o'clock here in Alaska and you might hear my cuckoo clock going off in the back. But thank you to all three of our speakers. This has been a really fascinating webinar, some really exciting work going on. And I'm really thrilled to see that we've got a really robust audience here today. So we've got a good 15 minutes left for our dialogue. So I will open up the floor and I encourage everyone in the audience to ask questions, share your ideas about how your work may align with the work of our presenters, suggest some possible applications of the new technology we've heard about today. I look forward to a discussion. So I'll open the floor at this point.
Hey, Danielle, I'll jump in to note, I think we have one person on the phone, which I actually believe is Jonathan Blythe, one of the team leaders, but I know being on the phone, it can be a little bit harder to jump in with questions. So maybe we'll give just 15 seconds. It's *6 to unmute if you're on the phone and if you'd like to jump in. And just to note also that we have at least two people who can't see the chat. So I see a couple of questions coming in that way. And if we could just read them out before they get answered, that would be super helpful.
Yeah, this
Go
is
ahead, Jonathan.
Thanks for calling on me. I don't have any questions at this time.
I saw a question in the chat regarding beaked whales.
Yes, the question was, can the frequency of beaked whales be detected, Léa?
So I think so far with the data that we've been recording, we think that it might be a little too high in frequency. There are lots of questions. So this is one of the follow-up studies. For now, we're sure about low frequency baleen whales. I would say that the engineers that are making the interrogator are telling us that it can record a higher frequency. If we go for very short cables, we could go for pretty high frequency up to 10 kilohertz, but I believe beak whales are even higher than that. So maybe beak whales would be very difficult anyways. but yeah, but like that's one of the follow-up study that we want to be doing is what is the quality of the data that we're getting for higher frequencies on various systems and with different trenching of fiber optic cable, with different armoring of those cables as well, because that might impact how it records as well. So this is something that has not really yet been quantified.
And Léa, Alan Pope put another question for you in the chat. How unique an opportunity is it to get these DIS Arctic data opportunities? Are DIS studies data limited, technique limited, or something else?
So for now, I think, well, first, it's a very emerging technology. So I don't think a lot of teams just know about it to start with. In terms of accessing fiber optic cables, we were lucky. The one we had, despite being a commercial one, is actually the one connecting research sites on Svalbard. So they were fairly easy to get access to. I think for real commercial cable, There might be other types of political difficulties around it. I think one of the advantages is that there are lots of various groups and researchers that are interested in it. So that might actually help to have like the group pressure to get access to that. The data limitation, basically the one important thing is that it's a lot of data. So it's more a question of data storage. We're recording 7 terabytes of data per day. What do you do with all of that data? How do you store it? How do you process it? I think that's one of the bottlenecks right now. So, yeah.
Thank you. And IARPC also has a data team, so maybe our data team can help with that too. And I encourage folks in the audience to turn your cameras on at this point, if you're willing.
Léa, I've got a question. What's the resolution you get on the frequencies? Can you detect different songs and sequences like that? Or is it just sort of, well, that's a blue whale and that's a fin whale and that's maybe another kind of whale?
So in terms of frequency resolution, from what I've seen, it's the same quality as a hydrophone. Maybe not, maybe a little noisier, but then you get like, because you have many of them, you can sum them up and make the data much better. So far, I would say you're able to distinguish different types of signals on the same recording, on the same at the same location. So, yeah.
I'm assuming you could also detect submarines and different submarines. Is that so? Have you just stumbled upon this, something that the Navy's known about for a long time?
So what is kind of fun about this technology, initially it was developed for the Navy, but the quality was too bad. And so, but then like lots of improvement with time, because that's back from the 80s. So like the improvement in the data quality has improved a lot. I don't think I've seen anything Navy interesting. We saw a lot of ships. I specifically actually scanned the AES to find a ship that I knew was completely fine to study, to start looking at them, just to make sure I was not pissing anyone off. And, you know, so this is how we went through it. So I see a question about the Navy review of the files. So this was in Norway, which the regulations are somehow different than from the US. I know that the agreement that we had with the Norwegian police was that we would show them the results that we have, and they would give us a green light or not if we can publish about it. So it went actually really well. I think that in the US it might be a little different. From discussion that we are planning to do this type of experiments here, and I think there would be needed to have a review of the data.
Do you know if regular moored hydrophones, do you have to go through those steps as well for regular hydrophones?
I think so, yes. I guess it might depend on the location, but I think so the center I'm working on is deploying hydrophone in lots of US waters. And I think for many of those locations, the files need to be reviewed. Not all of them though.
We never had our files reviewed north of Barrow, but maybe they don't care about north of Barrow. Well, now they would.
Well, they want to see all my nutrient data. I know that. No, I'm kidding. They don't care about my nutrients. Okay, well, I'm going to chime in then, since it's so quiet. For the ETA program, we're always looking for significant science gaps that might be. Our purse is not huge, but we're looking for those science gaps that can be addressed with small innovations, or maybe things are kind of going along, but you hit a roadblock and you need some engineering help. So I would just reach out to the community and say there's opportunities maybe of partnering with PMEL to maybe address some of your innovation needs.
Michael, I got a question for you. what do you think is the next horizon, pun intended, for sail drones? I mean, you're just going to run these things back and forth, between Dutch Harbor and the ice edge. What do you see as sort of the next innovation or next step for the sail drone programs?
Boy, that's a great question. I'm excited that Andy and others at PMEL are thinking about software, basically, that will help the sail drone poke around near the ice, but not maybe get caught up in it, because I like that part of the Arctic, the seasonal ice zone. I'm a co-investigator on a NASA-funded cruise that's going to start in a couple of weeks called SASSY, and it's a sea surface salinity validation experiment. And Jim Thompson, who works with me at APL, has 4 wave gliders that he just deployed up there, and he has a small winch on the bottom part of the wave glider that is moving a CTD up and down. He's not, 100% sure it's going to work real well, but he's going to try it out. And so, I would love to get some profiling capability from a sail drone. Those are 2 things that come to my mind.
So there's the new 75-foot sail drone that's now working out of the Aleutians. I think it's now in the water around the Aleutians. And do you know if that has a winch on it?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But that's something that we considered, and that they may have that capability now. They were doing multi-beam, and they need to have profiles of temperature to QC some of that data. So.
I've got a question for Calvin. The rise buoy, the rise mooring looks really cool. So the period of time when it's just laying on the ground, though, it seems like it could be very vulnerable. How have you guys planned?
That's our high risk. When I said high reward, high risk.
High risk.
That's
okay, I'm thinking about like sediment that moves along with currents on the bottom that could bury it, and fouling, and just dead
how do you get
rails falling
salinity
on it
after you've been sitting on the bottom all winter?
Yeah.
Right. Our chlorophyll, we do have a wiper on the chlorophyll, but what about salinity, and how do we handle it?
Cal, do you have to sit on the bottom? Can you just go down part way?
Well, this is what the question was: do we have a small float that would so the prowler goes down, hits a stop, and if we had a small float just below the stop, it would keep the prowler just off the bottom. So we're going to see, and that might be the next step, is to deal with that issue.
Yeah, because one can imagine going down to a place of neutral buoyancy, but mechanical stop is probably just easier. Just do that.
Yeah, so that's how it works now. It goes down to a stop and then profiles between the surface and the stop. So we would take it. The idea would be to take it to the bottom, hits the stop, put a small float there, the whole thing sinks, and then it's off the bottom a little bit. So there were a lot of discussions on this, and the thought was, well, let's make sure we can do this, and then we'll go to the next step. So.
And so you're deploying this on a shelf, on fairly shallow waters.
Yeah, it'll be deployed at M14, which is just between St. Lawrence and Nome, and then also in the Kuskokwim area, just inshore of between M2 and M4. So we're actually not up in the Chukchi this year. We didn't have the ship. We intended to be up at the Chukchi, but we didn't have the ship time to get up there.
Yeah. One day, could it be deployed in 1,000 meters of water?
Oh, the Prowler's been deployed in deep water.
Okay.
Oh, Leah, I see you answering the question in the chat. Would you mind doing it so everyone can hear as well for the folks who are going to view the recording later?
Yes, of course. So the question was, can you pick ship sonar pinging? And so I think, so in the Svalbard experiment, we're definitely not going high enough in frequency for that. We had a sampling frequency about 600 hertz, so up to 300 was our maximum. I believe that the OI DAS experiment that is off the coast of Oregon has gone up to sampling frequencies of 2 kilohertz for span of 60 kilometer of fiber optic cable. And so maybe some of the pinging is in that zone, but I don't even think that. I think that's higher up than that. So not yet. Or on shorter cables. So basically, I think that's always to me, that's something that took a little while to understand. But when the interrogator is sending a laser pulse in the fiber optic cable, it has to go all the way to the end and back before it can send another ping. So the length of the cable has a direct relationship with the sampling frequency that we can use in the fiber optic cable. So there might be some way around if, for example, we have an infinitely long fiber optic cable, then it doesn't need to see the end. Maybe that could be a possibility to go higher up in frequency on longer cables. But for now, that's kind of the physical limitation we're hitting.
So Hazel, I see that we are at the 75-minute mark now. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but I also want to recognize that we still have quite an audience online. So do we have the ability to let this go a little bit longer, or should we cut this off and encourage everyone to follow up with the speakers individually?
I'm available to stay on. I don't know if the speakers are around. I'm happy to keep the room open a little longer. Maybe we'll just pause and say goodbye to anyone that needs to sign off. And if there are any, I'm not sure of the next observing team meeting, but if there's announcements from any of the other teams, we could make that now, or general community announcements, and then I'll keep the room open for another 5 or 10 minutes.
Great, thank you so much, and huge thanks to all three of our speakers. This has been fascinating, and I hope the conversation will continue offline after the event as well. Do any of our other team leads have anything to add?
No, except a really hearty thank you. That's really been one of the best observing meetings we've had in a while, and definitely the high point of my day. So thank you.
Yeah, this is Jonathan Blythe. Thanks a lot for some great presentations. And yeah, I look forward to, I'm not sure what our next meeting plan is for the polar technology community, but I think we're planning something for late summer or early fall. We'll have a follow-up with a Antarctic project to present some project-specific updates on technology and innovation. Thank you.
I'll just add, Mike, I found your observations about trying to detect the ice edge pretty interesting. And I'll just tell a short story here because I know people are leaving, but my father-in-law was going into East Greenland after the war. And they did it, and they detected ice by having someone down in the engine room tasting the coolant water that was coming in. And he swears they could detect the presence of icebergs in particular, but also ice by detecting the change in salinity on the coolant water. That was a little bit low tech, but same idea.
Well, Will, I invite you to come next late February, early March to Seattle. We haven't done it for a couple of years because of COVID, but I run something called the Salinity Taste Test at the Pacific Science Center during that time. And you can, I'll give you samples of seawater to taste, and you can tell me if you can do it.
I'm pretty good at that. I used to do estuarine water with about 5 parts per thousand. So I'm going to take you.
Okay.
So Mike, I'm assuming that the Saildrones were fully you had full sensor suites on the Saildrones, and the schematic you showed didn't include everything on it. And then Chell also had in our 2019 mission, had the other, I'm not sure what it was, what sensor she had, but it was pointed down to the sea surface to try to get that skin temperature. Did you have that on this last mission?
Right. There are these white things sticking out the front they called it the unicorn. I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And didn't have it on this last mission, no. But no, didn't have it, but had it in 2019. And Peter Minette is looking at that data. Right.
And they must have full, they have oxygen, chlorophyll. I mean, it's got the full suite, I'm assuming.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And we found that oxygen data was terrible. So Ned worked through it quite a bit, and we had a summer intern last year, and it was nonsense, the oxygen data from some of that mission. And I think that it will really help if these Saildrones, that are out now in the basins, amongst all of the new biogeochem floats, Argo. So now you'll have means of kind of bringing all of that data together. And I know so many folks are interested in that decent oxygen data for the Argo missions to assess, oxygen minimum zones, trends, and spatial extents, that there'll be some effort to get all of that straightened out. And I think it would be really, it would be great to have a method to do primary production, really decent primary production methods from the Saildrone. And really,
I think you're identifying the soft underbelly of the collaboration with Saildrone. Marisol, our new lead PI, also identified oxygen issues, and it's because there's this sort of this collaboration with Saildrone, and you don't own the Saildrone, and so they're doing stuff for you, and so yeah, calibration has been an issue, and not just with oxygen, and that's an issue that needs to be really looked at in more detail. I agree.
Well, and the other issue we ran into is that they're making modifications to the Saildrone without communicating to the Yate team when we were working with them. So yeah. Whether it's changing different sensors or moving the sensors, whatever they were doing, yeah. And then they were, this was very early in the whole development, and so there were lots of iterations in terms of sensors and figuring out how to calibrate things and the whole business. But I think it's mature enough now that we kind of should be moving beyond those issues and getting to the nitty gritty of getting this high quality data. And the other thing that Ned found was that the data's out there and people are writing papers on data that's not quite ready for prime time.
Yeah, so I think you guys at PMEL and us with the MIST project should write a joint letter to Saildrone telling them to get their act together, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to mention that the oxygen data was amazingly bad. Someone asked a question about what Saildrones might do or can be doing. Well, as Calvin mentioned, that we have some out in Atlantic right now with shorter wings measuring hurricanes. And last year we sailed one into a hurricane and made the first measurements from an autonomous vehicle in a hurricane. And the other thing is that we're doing work comparing them with NDBC buoys, and we found out that they can measure wave spectra pretty well. So NDBC is looking into the possibility of using Saildrones to measure wave spectra, perhaps replacing buoys, but that's down the road.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a physical oceanographer. I think temperature and salinity are just fine. But yeah, the other stuff, yeah, it needs some attention.
Well, and I think as you mentioned, Mike, I don't know if it's so much a letter as it's an accounting of what do we feel is properly calibrated, and what does the community agree on that, hey, this is high quality, you're doing this right, and which parameters still need to be worked on, and not just say, hey, you need to work on this, but what's a roadmap for what's a roadmap for nailing this down. And
yeah, I agree. Yeah, we don't want to just complain. We want to make it better.
Give them a vision.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we tried it with chlorophyll and we didn't get anywhere. And that was not on Saildrone, I don't think. Ned could comment on that. That was more on the manufacturers, on the vendors.
Okay.
Right, two different vendors' machines gave two different answers, even though they were using the same LED sensors and using the same calibration methods. That's a mystery why that should be. And we send the data to both sets, and they fell silent. Let's just say neither manufacturer would comment on that.
So I feel like the data quality issue is partially just a documentation issue. Like if you're the PI, you're on the ship, you're deploying the instrument, you have field notes, and that's missing with when you're using a vendor who's doing the deployment for you.
Yeah.
So coming up with really good documentation for calibration, for like someone mentioned position of a sensor, you know, that's the sort of thing you write down. There's no standard way to document that. So there might need to be some documentation standards developed for Saildrones so they can just communicate with the PIs, tell them what they're doing.
Yeah, we've been through that a little bit, and sometimes it helps and sometimes it doesn't ever happen.
But even getting a good it took a while to really understand their sampling routines. How are they averaging on what times, you know, that was a process that Ned worked through intensively to figure out exactly what is the data we're getting. So yeah, it was a lot of, and so many sensors on there. You have to work through each one of these. So it was quite a task.
Yeah, and you've got to remember that their expertise is in sailing and building boats and websites and that sort of thing, and not in oceanographic instruments, and definitely not in oceanographic measurements. So there's a learning curve there, and they haven't really employed any oceanographers to work for them, which I think is a pity.
Are you looking for a job, Ned?
No, I'm not.
Well, it might be worth thinking about whether a team or a group of teams associated with IARPIC could help convene a conversation along these lines, and see if we can get the right people at the table. You know, let us know if you think there's something that we can do to help move the ball on this.
Well, I don't know if there's any other Arctic missions that are in the works at the moment. So Mike, you said that this is it for your program. ETA is not. ETA is kind of moved on to other things right now. So I'm not sure now. Levine is off the phone. He was on earlier. NIMFS, of course, picked this up a couple of years ago during COVID and had to do a fish survey and did it with Saildrones. And that meant there was a lot. It's not just a fish survey, but it's they're measuring all sorts of things from that Saildrone. So iOS was doing some mapping. So during all of these various efforts, while they're funded to do essentially a fish survey or bathymetry, you're still collecting all this other data. And who are the PIs that are making sure that that data is of quality, of high enough quality, because that data just goes out and it's public in some cases. And there's no QC or no, so here's NOAA data available from NOAA, and maybe it's good and maybe it's not. So if there's no PI associated with some of these projects, then how do you follow through? And
I mean, I know someone to talk to. I mean, Eric Lindstrom used to be the physical oceanography program manager at NASA, and now he officially is working with Saildrones. So.
Oh, I thought he
No. We've tried to work with Eric Lindstrom on the oxygen issue, and he no longer works at Saildrone.
Oh, okay.
Not there.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
I don't know if the two things are related.
You harassed him into quitting?
So I'm going to reach out to Heather. Heather, did I miss anything as far as talking about ETA that you felt that should be said?
No, I don't think so. I wish more people would reach out. It'd be fun to talk more projects. And Danielle, thanks for setting this up through IARPIC. I didn't even realize it was you, so it's nice to see your face.
Yes, you too. Well, nice to hear your voice anyway.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, kids are home and it's been a day. So
I get it.
But yeah, no, I think that you touched on so many things, Cal. So.
Well, I mean, Cal, for the future of Arctic heat or whatever you're going to call it, it'll be fun to have Saildrones going up there at the same time you're dropping things from airplanes. What do you think of that?
So Kevin Wood used to lead the Arctic heat aircraft work, and he had a Navy, I think it was, camera, which actually had the sights on it, so you could shoot, you could hold the vision of the Saildrone while they were flying around it. So in case you wanted to fire, you could hit it. And they were flying right by the Saildrone and dropping assets right near it. So that we're unsure about flights next year. We have a proposal in and for doing flights next year to MPRB, and then for the future, we should write a proposal to get Saildrones and the aircraft work and any ship work all coordinated. And
Yeah.
I don't know if that would be MPRB or if that would be NSF. I don't know.
Yeah, well,
That would be for 24. That's what I would like to. That's what I would like to do.
Yeah.
MPRB can't support the Saildrones because they're too expensive. So it might have to be something through NSF.
Sounds like a project for NOP. We can pitch in where needed. AUs too might be able to help with a little bits here and there. None of our budgets are huge, but maybe something like a NOP is an option.
Well, the other thing that I'm really interested in is we have a JPSS proposal right now to look at phytoplankton speciation, ground truthing those measurements compared to the PACE satellite, and the new algorithms being derived from the PACE satellite. So we also could put on the wing of the aircraft a high spectral imaging system that is analogous to the satellite, and then fly over Saildrone, fly over ships of opportunity to help ground truth some of that work. So maybe that fits into this kind of proposal as well.
cool.
Well, I think with that, we'll close the meeting. Thank you all so much for your time. I hope you all found it a worthwhile use of your time, and we hope you'll continue engaging with our collaboration team meetings to keep some of this conversation going.
Yeah,
Well,
thanks.
thank you for having me.
Thanks
Appreciate
very
it.
much. Liz.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.